Good morning. Let's turn to page 544, page 544. Let's stand and we'll sing Work for the Night is Coming, verses 1 and 3. Work for the night is coming.
Is it on a CD? Is it possible? Is it possible just to go right off my website?
Might be. I'll find out.
Brother Gary, would you lead us in prayer? Amen. Please be seated.
Then they do the offering. Oh. I was wondering.
Then I'll come back in here.
Great.
Catch you.
Okay.
I need to get one of those.
I just got it, and it's really helpful. Even with
Old, I can't see it.
even with music, like I just
Yeah.
I can just turn pages and
That's great.
yeah.
Good morning. Good morning. Good to see everybody here this morning. Glad you can make it to our Sunday school hour. We're kicking off our missions conference today. And so our Sunday school teacher this morning will be Kevin Inabuku, who is coming to us from Salt Lake City. The Lord is just getting them started in church planting, and he's just out getting that support ready to go to plant a church there in Salt Lake City. So they came from the island of Guam. You came here when?
June.
In June. And right now in Salt Lake City, it's in the 30s in the morning, and they're having a real hard time adjusting
Yeah.
to that. So he was glad to walk out this morning and feel the way that it felt here in
Yeah.
West Virginia. So we're glad he is here. We never met before, but we have all the same friends. And so we had a good time talking behind their backs last night, around the table, and we're glad he's here. God's going to use them mightily in the future, has used them mightily in the island of Guam, and we're excited what the Lord has. So Kevin's going to come, just kind of talk to us this morning, share his heart about what God is doing, and then he's going to preach to us in the morning service. So Kevin,
Thanks, Pastor. Thank you. Good morning. Well, it's good to be here. I've heard a lot about Pastor Treg, especially recently, and praying for him, not having met him, but praying that God would heal him after his heart attack. And thankful that he's here with us this morning. I want to share a little bit about my background because I do have roots in West Virginia. It's kind of crazy to think. I'm actually born and raised on the island of Oahu, Hawaii. That's where I spent the first part of my life. And then the last 15 years I've spent on a little island called Guam in the Pacific, which you might have heard about in the news recently with North Korea and the threats there. But my mom is actually from Nitro, and nobody goes to Nitro just to go to Nitro. We didn't even go to Nitro when we were in Hawaii. We did a few times just because that's where my grandparents were. And it was always an adventure going there because I think the biggest thing to do in the summertime was to go to the Nitro pool, and everybody was there at the same time. And growing up on an island where the ocean was right at your doorstep, it wasn't really that big of a deal going to the Nitro pool, but it was because my grandma made it a big deal, and it was fun. But they were unsaved. My mom grew up in an unsaved family, and she had 3 brothers. She was the only girl. And her senior year of high school, a friend had invited her to a youth activity at Cross Lanes. I don't know if you've heard of Cross Lanes. I think is it Bible Church or Baptist Church? So she left that activity with a lot of questions. And so she had a card of the pastors and called the number to ask questions, but he didn't answer the phone. And she left a message and said, I would love to talk to somebody about getting saved. And so Monday morning came and he got the message and called her and was able to lead my mom to the Lord at 18 years old. And so at that point, she didn't know what she was going to do. She got saved, and at that point, she was just surrendered to whatever. My grandparents were unsaved, and so Pastor Efall at the time, I encouraged her to go to Appalachian Bible Institute. And so she did. My grandparents were against it. They said, you can go to West Virginia University, Marshall will pay for it, but not to a Christian school. And so she went all on her own and paid her way through and worked, finished with her certificate. And Bob Jones University, this is like the only time they've ever done this. They actually went out and asked another college if there were any students that would like to jump in on their summer mission trip to Hawaii. And so my mom was finished with school, and she said, I don't know what I'm going to do, so I think I want to do this. And she went on this trip to Hawaii. My dad was part of the crew that picked up the team from the church to the church at the airport, and they met, and it was love at first sight, you know. And so she stayed that whole summer and ended up staying and not going back with the team. Lived with the family in the church for 2 years, and they got married a couple years later, and she's been there ever since. And so that's my West Virginia roots, all the way to Hawaii. But I say that because these kind of things only God does. I mean, God puts our paths in other people's paths for a reason. I wouldn't be here had it not been for a friend that invited my mom to a youth activity. And then I think on my dad's side, I don't think I would be here had it not been for a church planner that came to Hawaii years ago and just every weekend would get a van and pick up kids to go to Bible club. And all of my dad's brothers and sisters, 7 of them, and my grandfather's brothers' kids, 7 of them, 14 of them would pile into the van at young ages, and they would go to Bible club. And so all of my uncles and aunts were saved at a young age through a church planner, which then led to my grandparents being saved as well. And I think about just the perfect plan of our God, but yet He chose to use people. And it's all across the world. I mean, so how does a girl from Nitro, West Virginia, a cheerleader at Nitro High School, go to Hawaii, marry a guy, a first-generation Christians, and really they had no clue how to raise a family. They were just saved. They weren't raised in a Christian family. But there was a church that was started in Hawaii that helped to nurture them and grow them in the Word, which led then to us, and here we are. And the story of my journey was a little different. So I grew up in a family that put the Lord first, but as you all know, you go through a stage where it's like, is this really real? And especially in Hawaii, where I had a lot of friends that weren't Christians and loved to live the life in Hawaii. I mean, it's fun. And so I was caught up in that all through high school, and my parents didn't really know how to deal with that because they didn't go through that. They were unsaved all through high school, and yet here their son they were trying to do their best to raise was turning away from the Lord. And so my dad came to me after my senior year and said, listen, you need to either leave for 1 year or we're going to have to kick you out of the house. I had 3 sisters and I was the only son, and it just wasn't a good influence on my family. And so my grandpa had actually done that with my uncle. And so he said, I'm going to try this. And so they sent me off to Bob Jones University for a year. And I said, I can handle a year because I didn't have anything better. I didn't have any other options. All my friends were worse off than I was. They lived on the beach. They didn't have a family. And I was dating a girl for about all through high school, 4 years. And we had planned to get married, go to the University of Hawaii and get married right out of high school. So my dad stepped in and said, you need to leave for a year. I went away for 1 year. I went away not wanting to make any new friends. I had my friends. I went away not happy with my parents for doing that, so I didn't talk to them the whole time. And back then, I mean, it's not that far ago, but there was no email still. We still had to write letters. And so it was a little lonely. And I remember just sitting in my room, just hating life. But the Lord used actually Nitro, West Virginia in the story. I had not spent hardly any time with my grandparents, and so their health was declining. And really, as a grandson, one of their only grandsons, I felt like I probably should come up here and help them during Christmas break. And the whole semester, I hadn't talked to my parents. I was almost through the year to go back and live my life and do what I wanted to do. And so I came up here to Nitro, West Virginia to spend the Christmas break with my grandparents. And it was a little hard. I mean, imagine not knowing your grandparents and then living with them all of a sudden, and their health isn't good. So my grandpa's hooked up to an oxygen tank, and my grandma actually had Alzheimer's. And so I didn't even know her normally. I mean, she was like seeing people, seeing things, and she's like, I remember laying on the couch at 10 o'clock at night watching TV, and here comes my 88-year-old grandma crawling on the floor trying to hide from people. And I'm just like, I'm kind of freaking out. Like, who are these people? Where am I at? And but the Lord used that to actually start conversations back with my parents. I mean, I had to call my mom. This is her parents. What do? I don't know what to do. And at first I was telling my grandma, there's nobody here. She would get mad and upset, and one time she got a knife and she was coming after me because she thought I was actually with them, trying to get her. And it was just a hard Christmas break. But the Lord used that to actually start chiseling away at my heart, to get me to stop thinking about me and to have to care for someone else, and especially when it's your grandparents. And I remember calling my mom and just being like, I have no clue what to do. And I remember having to just now care for my grandma, actually, get her cleaned up, put her in bed and lay with her in bed and just care for her. And I'd never done that. Life was all about me. And that was the beginning stages, I believe, of God just softening my heart. I mean, I had no place to go. I was at West 14th Street in Nitro, West Virginia. It's not like I could go anywhere. I didn't know anybody. I was stuck right there all Christmas break. And I went back to school in January went by. I don't remember the message that was preached in chapel, but mid-February, I just remember that God just convicted my heart, and I went back to my room and I asked him to forgive me. I called my parents and asked them to forgive me. And that was the beginning of a changed life. Lord, I don't want to live for me. I want to live for you. And so whatever you want me to do, I'll do. And that was not probably what I really wanted to do. I wanted to go back home, and the Lord hasn't brought me back to Hawaii. I mean, I was an accounting major, and the Lord switched my major to music, and I finished at Bob Jones and traveled with Steve Pettit for 3 years. And then that's how I met Marty Heron, who was pastoring out in Guam, who now is my father-in-law. So I went out there and have been an assistant pastor at Harvest Baptist Church for the last almost 15 years. And I always wanted to go back to Hawaii. I mean, that's where I was raised. But the Lord closed the doors, and partly because I think there just needed to be some time. I mean, the people there just remembered who I was. I mean, there needs to be some proving. I mean, this is really real. I mean, I remember when I went back the first summer to work at a camp, and all of my friends came, and they were like, hey, let's go out, let's go party. And I said, no, let me tell you something. This is what happened to me. And they just laughed and said, okay, we've seen this before. This happens all the time. We'll give you a couple weeks. You'll be back out with us. I mean, these are guys that, I mean, they were my life. I mean, I'd grown up with them, and they didn't really support me. So I remember going back to my room and saying, Lord, actually, I know this is a wrong motive, but I want to prove them wrong. And but the reality was that there had to be some proving. I mean, my life had some consistent patterns of wrong behavior and attitudes for so long that God needed to do some sanctifying in my own heart and life, and there was some time, and little did I know it was going to be 20 plus years of being away. But I'm thankful God opened up a door to be on a small island, which is very similar to Hawaii. Actually, would say Guam is about 20 years behind, just in economy and just in life, but still island. And God had allowed me to be in an awesome ministry, reaching out to many different cultures on the island. We have an academy that has about 1,000 students, a Bible college with about 80 to 90 students that reaches out to the Micronesian islands, and then our church, which is about 600 to 700 people on a little island. And I'm thankful for that, because it was over the last 15 years that God is able to grow me in pastoral ministry and solidify what do I believe and why am I doing this. And so I look back at God's sovereign plan, all the way from my mom at 18 years old, to my dad being saved from church planters, to how he's led even me to Guam, and now, Lord willing, back to Hawaii, and it's unbelievable. But in the process of it, you're just like, Lord, what are you doing? I don't get it. I mean, I don't really know what your perfect plan is. And there are many times that I would say, I would be questioning God's plan. Why am I still here? Lord, I want to get back to Hawaii. And the story hasn't stopped there. About 5 years ago, I went to my father-in-law and I said, hey, I think it's time. I think God is moving us to church plant out in Hawaii. Now, let me just give you a little bit of history about Hawaii. Hawaii is, historically, it's Christian. I mean, the missionaries came back when there were the last queen, or the last reigning monarch of Hawaii, Queen Liliuokalani, who was a Christian. And that's when America came in and basically took over Hawaii. And so there was at least in its roots, Christianity. Since then, it's become a very liberal place, but yet there's a lot of influences still. But I remember growing up, and not a lot of people would go to church. But since I've been away, there's been a lot of excitement about church. Not solid churches, a lot of satellite churches and big churches. But I'm just thankful, first of all, that people like my friends are actually interested about talking about the Lord. And so if anything, I'm thankful that stoked the fire. But there is a need for good, healthy churches in Hawaii. There have been church planters that have come out, like I said, years ago, and just have had a tough go at it. I mean, it's hard to be a church planter. I just started, but even in Utah, I've met with men who have been there for 3 to 4 decades, and they'll tell stories of how hard it is. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy to leave everybody that you know, community in your church, family, and go to a place all by yourself with your family and plant a church. And so those were some of the fears even that I had about heading back to Hawaii. Lord, I got 4 kids under 5. And I'm from the place. I don't know anything about church planting. I've been in a big ministry for a long time. What do you want me to do? And then I got a phone call from a guy named Danny Brooks, who was a pastor in Greenville, South Carolina for 25 years. And God had been working in his heart to church plant out in Salt Lake City. And and he said, hey, Kevin, I would love for you to come and partner with us as a team member. He goes, I know that God is burdening you for Hawaii, and I want to do whatever we can to help prepare you, but would love for you to come on our team. And God had used Will Galkin, who will be here later this week, as a key in bringing us together. And we just prayed, Lord, I think this might be the path. I mean, it doesn't make sense when you put it on paper. I mean, why would I go from Guam to Salt Lake City and then to Hawaii? I mean, Hawaii and Guam are in the same ocean. Let's just go from one island to the next. But in reality, I didn't want to put my family in a place where we just didn't know what we were doing. So why not learn and at the same time be a part of a brand new church plant? God had put 4 guys together, friends of mine for the last 20 years, in a church plant setting already in Salt Lake City called Gospel Grace Church. Will Galkin is a part of that with Jonathan Albright and John Kopp and Lucas Counterman. And so part of the idea was that we'd actually come into the city and learn from their team church planting model and philosophy, be a part of a church plant, and then in the next 3 to 5 or more years that we would be sent out from there back to Hawaii with another team. And I really believe that. I really believe that that God is doing a work in church planting through teams. I think there's so much that can be done together. When I talk to some of these church planters that are in Hawaii that are friends of ours that I've known my whole life, they would actually say the same thing. I wish we could have another chance and do it together as a team. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, you think of the cost just to even have a church in Hawaii. I mean, it's not cheap. But the fact that then there's so you have to work bivocational, and then there's shepherding, and then there's just going out and telling people about Jesus. And so doing it together with different gifts as teammates, there's more that can be done. And so even since June, I've just been excited about how God is forming this team in Salt Lake City. My father-in-law, when he was praying with us about this move, he said to me, he said, Kevin, what about that area in the northeast side of Oahu? There's a whole section on Oahu, about 6,500 people in this area, that's all Mormon. It's the second largest temple. BYU Hawaii is there. They have if you've ever been to Hawaii and you've done tourist things, they have a Polynesian Cultural Center that's there, and a lot of people go because it's really kind of a neat place to learn about the islands of Polynesia, but it's all run by the Mormon church. And so as God started to direct our paths to Salt Lake City, we started to find out that there's a whole section of Salt Lake City that's made up of islanders. It's unbelievable. I mean, I drive into this place and I'm like, there's a charter school here for Hawaiians, and there's Polynesians, and there's even people from Guam, and they're all in this section of the city, and they've been brought over by the Mormon church, and they're there. And so when you talk to them, they'll ask you, hey, what are you doing? I say, hey, we're starting a church. And they'll ask us, are you LDS? And I'm like, no, we actually believe in the Bible. We believe in the Lord. And I'll talk to them, and I'll say, well, are you LDS? And they actually will say, yeah, but not really. The Islanders like to party. So there's a little bit of that. I mean, they're just honest. They're just saying, yeah, we are. That's why we're here. But we're really not. And so my father-in-law said, hey, why don't you pray about church planting on that section, in that section of the island, the northeast section called Laie. So we started. At first, I'm thinking, no, I grew up on Oahu. We don't go there. I mean, I was thinking a little bit closer to where I was raised. I mean, that's where I'm familiar with. This is the people that I know. But there's not one church on that side of the island. I mean, I believe Satan has had a stronghold on that side of the island for decades. And then we started to pray about our outreach in Salt Lake City to the islanders. So these were our prayer requests. Impossible, at least in my own eyes, for God to do. God, would you save people in this city that would have direct connection to families on this side of the island that could actually break through their the stronghold of the Mormon religion. And really, that's the only way, because family is so connected and tight in Hawaii that if there was a family member in Salt Lake City at Mecca that would turn to Christ, it would have huge implications to the family members here on Oahu. And so we started praying that way, and we're praying. I mean, we're praying that God would do it like right away. But it's obviously in His time. And just last week, I got called by a club volleyball team. I grew up playing volleyball, and I've coached for the last 15 plus years, and have gotten some training with USA Volleyball. But I got called up from this club team that's actually right in the middle of this area. And they asked me, would you want to coach these 18 and under national club team? Most of them are Polynesian, minorities. It's low income, it's poverty. I mean, most of them don't have much. But at the same time, there's a number of these kids that play at Riverton High School. And I'm thinking, that's the area that we're actually starting a church, in Riverton area. And we'll share a little bit of it in the video this morning. And so just last week, I'm just amazed. God, you kind of worked this out. I had no clue that, I mean, it's a big area. It takes a while to make connections. And all of a sudden, here I am, have an opportunity to start in January and to coach from January to May. Along the same time, we're going to be launching this church plant in Riverton. And I know that God's in it. In the beginning, there's so many fears. You're just like, really? I'm going to go back to the States? I mean, it's no offense, but when you live overseas for quite a long time, you just do life differently, right? And we don't have as many options. I mean, I think that was probably the hardest thing for us, is actually walking into a Costco and just not being able to make a decision. I mean, we get shipments coming in every Thursday to Guam, and by the time you get to the store, if you don't go at a certain time, the whole island's there. And so if you don't get it, you don't get it, and you gotta wait for another week. And so that's just kind of life, and we're okay with that. It's just life. But then you come and you're like, wow, I can actually understand how it would be easy just to covet and get wrapped up in that. But yet, as we've been in Salt Lake for the last few months, we went from a 90% on the island of Guam, 90% of the population are Catholic, to actually an area that's 90% LDS. But it's a little bit different. I mean, the Catholics in Guam, at least because there's been a lot going on in the Catholic Church, they've been so open to the gospel, and God's doing a great work out there. But the LDS religion, I mean, it's hard. And so the area that we're aiming, Riverton, Utah, is 85 to 90% LDS. It's a town that everything about it, when you drive in, it's LDS. The perfect little neighborhoods with the ward on each corner, and it's a hard area. It's the highest rate of antidepressants in the country by women. It's the highest suicide rate of teenagers from the ages 10 to 17 in the country. I mean, it's a hopeless religion. There's no grace. It's very legalistic, and so there's no hope. I mean, I have a friend that graduated from Northland, and he's out there, and he's a chaplain in Riverton. And so he rides with police officers, and they get calls every night for suicide attempts. And you walk into these homes, and it's perfect on the outside, but it's messed up on the inside. It's because no man-made standard can give peace. And so you got kids that can't be, they're not perfect. They're sinners, but they can't measure up. And there's no hope in that. And then you walk in, he's telling me this story, you're walking into these families, and it's horrible. I mean, you would never know driving by in the neighborhood. I mean, we're not talking about the low-income neighborhood that I'm coaching at. I mean, that's obvious. You drive in and you're like, man, this area's got issues. And you're driving into a suburban area that's like The grass is perfect. The houses are perfect. They all dress up on Sundays and go to their wards. And yet they have a need in their heart for the gospel. And so God has created a burden in our hearts for these people. And we're thankful. I'm thankful that we can learn about church planting and that we can actually be a part of partnering together to see a healthy church planted in Riverton, Utah. Riverton, Utah is, there's a church planter actually that's been there. He's about 77 years old. His name is Lloyd Larson. He was sent out with Baptist Mid-Missions years ago. And so in the process of us coming to church plant in Riverton, Utah, he actually approached Danny Brooks and I and said, hey, listen, I got a church building. It's all paid off. We got like 15 members, and I'm 77. And he said, I would love for you guys to come in and just take over. And we're just like, what? Like, what in the world? We're like church planting mode. And all of a sudden, it's turning into a revitalization. But in reality, it's still a church plant. The 15 or so members that come to Riverton don't really live in Riverton. They live in West Jordan or Sandy, and they drive in. And it's normal to drive, like some folks from this church drive from, pastor's saying, from a town north or wherever. It's just normal. But in Riverton itself, there's a need for a healthy church. And so Lloyd Larson is just unbelievable. First of all, here's a man that actually has paid the price. He went out solo to start this church in the last 4 decades. And he, in the 80s, it was hard, period, to have a Baptist church in Salt Lake City or in Utah. And so the Mormons were very hard against him. Fact is, he had his daughter, she died at age 8. And the Mormons went around taking credit for that. And so you have that in your face, and then you have 2 sons, because of the hardness of actually being a church planter in this area and not seeing any fruit. They just hated God. They didn't want anything to do with it, and they left. So he's got 2 sons that don't even want anything to do with the Lord. But then you talk to Lloyd Larson, and you see a man who loves God with the joy of the Lord. I'm sitting in the same room with him. We've been meeting for the last few months, and I'm just convicted of a man of faith that we're going to talk about this morning in church. But, what would you do if that were you? I have 4 kids under 5, but if that were my kid, I think I would just, Lord, what are you doing? I would get upset. But here he is, he's faithful. And then I'm talking to his daughter who's in the church, and she's so excited for this. She goes, I just can't wait for my dad to just enjoy life. Because we've asked him to stay with us in this endeavor, because he's just got a wealth of knowledge and wisdom about LDS religion that we could use. And he left New York to come out there many, many years ago. And he goes, I can go back to New York if you want. And I said, and both Danny and I are like, no, we want you to stay. But here his grandson, her son, her 2 sons, both are the same, have turned from the Lord. One just got sentenced to put in prison. So you got a man who is surrendered to God as a church planter in a hard place, in one of the hardest places in our country, and his 2 sons and his 2 grandsons have turned from God. Now, why do I say that? I say that because persecution often doesn't just come from the outside. You might not be in an underground church in China, running for your life, or being persecuted in the Middle East, but here in our country, we would say about Salt Lake City that Satan is sitting on the throne. Just last week, Danny and I were talking, because there just seemed to be so much going on. Like, there was between our teams and teammates, and we were like, something is going on. It's the principalities and powers of the air. They just had their national convention, and we're sitting there going, like, thousands are in the city right now. these LDS missionaries that are here, and they're having their word from the Lord. And Satan is loving it. I mean, it's causing confusion, and here we are, and you feel it. And so persecution might not be just physical, but the spiritual and the emotional and the familial stuff that goes on, that Satan goes after. And I just am so thankful that I can meet a guy like Lloyd Larson who has been faithful. I mean, for someone like me that I haven't lived that life. I mean, it's convicting, but it's also encouraging. And I'm going to talk about that of Hebrews 11. And we all need examples of faith. What do examples do for us? They actually help us to be pushed forward in this race of faith to say, you can do it. I mean, there have been men and women who have run this race of faith with all the adversity and persecutions, and yet they still lived lives of faith. And so here we are, we're going, you know what, life is hard for us. We just left our family, we just left our, like emotionally, my wife, I mean, she grew up in Guam, she was there for 17 plus years. So that's all she's known. And so, yeah, emotionally it's hard. And then we lift up our eyes and we look around and go, there have been men and women who have lived lives of faith that we can look to as examples for us. And I'm just thankful. I wanted to share that because it's a little bit about what's going on and how God, we left Guam thinking we're going to be a part of a church plant, and God has changed this around. And we're learning right now that what God wants for us is just to submit to His will every single day. I'm the kind of person like, this is the plan, so we're going to stick to the plan. Well, the plan has changed since June. And it's okay. I mean, since June, there have been 2 team members that have been added to our team, and I didn't have a say in it. But I trust God through Danny, who God's led him to be the lead. And so we are just learning to submit to the Lord's plan. And in all of that, that's really what faith is. God, you've led us through your word. I don't really know. What I see is not really making any sense. But faith is not really living by what I see. It's living for things that are unseen. And man, I'm telling you, it's been a change. We landed in June, and all of a sudden you're just doubting and questioning and wondering, what do we do? We just left Guam, 600 people in our church and a thriving ministry, and we're actually going back in time a little bit to 15 people. And then you start having questions. Lord, are we going to be here trying to convince 15 people that we need to reach souls? Because in a church plant, you just start, and we're digging in, and this is what's going to happen. But yet, in the process, God has given us a love for these 15 people. They're great people, and for Lloyd to be able to share the history of how God provided in Riverton when everybody and everything was against them, and all of a sudden there's this, okay, Lord, man, I needed this. And so we submit to that. And so it's actually it's a revitalization, but in reality, it's still going to be a church plant in the sense of reaching the area of Riverton with the gospel, because no one in Riverton attends this church. And that's an amazing thing. I mean, it's one thing to have converts or people in Morgantown saved and they're attending this church, but if this church was here in Morgantown and everybody came from Pittsburgh or from another area to come to this church, then all of a sudden you're like, are we reaching this area, right? And so that's kind of it. We're like, we have a burden to reach this area, and that's going to be hard. And only God can do that. Just another quick stat about the valley. So Salt Lake City and the whole valley, it's the most unchurched city in America, with less than 2%. And so we have a mission field within our own borders. And you wouldn't think that. Fact is, coming from Guam, where we're 3 hours from Korea, 3 hours from Manila, 3 hours from Tokyo, 3 hours from Hong Kong, 3.5 hours from Cairns, Australia. I mean, so we're just right there. And God has given us the opportunity to have missionaries in Indonesia and Myanmar and China, and underground pastors that we have been helping. And so you see that. You're just, it's there all the time. And yet you come back to the States and then all of a sudden you go, there's a need in America. I mean, there's a need for the gospel. I mean, when you're rubbing shoulders with underground pastors in China who would do anything to read the Bible, we have had men from the States come over and train these pastors in a week's block time. And so our ministry helps to facilitate that because we're so close in proximity. And so you see that and you hear stories all the time. And then you come back to America and you're just burdened. And they said that behind China and India, America is the third largest mission field. And here in the valley, I mean, it's real. I coach volleyball at Intermountain Christian School. It's the only Christian school in the valley. And the interesting thing about it is it's so diverse. I mean, you're talking about Christians from all stripes of churches. But what's neat about it is there's unity and diversity because there's so few in number. I mean, here I am and I'm talking, I mean, they go to a different kind of church, but there's such a love and sweet spirit because they don't have a community of Christian believers. And so here they come together in a Christian school and everybody's on the same page because they go back to their neighborhood and they're back by themselves. And so in number, Christianity is very small. It's very small in the valley. But I say that because God's doing something in the valley. They say in the next 5 years, the population is going to double. It's at 2.6 million people, and it's going to double in the next 5 years. They're calling it the new Silicon Valley. Businesses are moving into the valley like crazy. And so what's awesome about it is with the businesses that come in, come non-LDS people. And what that does is it just transforms neighborhoods, right? I mean, it just changes the perfect little neighborhood that they've had for years. I mean, Salt Lake City, first of all, let me just say, I'm not really good with directions, but Salt Lake City is really easy to navigate. I mean, I think it was Brigham Young that actually designed and put that city in order and just the streets. Everything is in a grid. And so even from that aspect, going into the little towns where everything is perfectly arranged, you got non-LDS people coming in with from companies that are moving into the city, and they're not just anybody, they're actually young in their 20s and 30s. And so it's a whole different perspective on life, and they're open. But it's changing the demographic of the neighborhoods. And we believe that's an awesome thing. Because now you're not just living in your perfect little Mormon neighborhood, but you have all kinds of people living next to you, and it's going to change just life. And so they're looking at that and they're already trying to prepare for that, but it's amazing. And I really believe that because of the faithfulness of a lot of these church planters, now Lloyd Larson's just one out of many that have been church planting in Utah for decades. But I really believe that there's going to be fruit to the harvest here that they have sown. And we're praying for God to do some pretty awesome things. Now, I just, by way of prayer request, if you would pray for us, what I've shared with you about our burdens, first of all, anything can change, and we're submitted to that. But these are some impossible prayer requests. Lord, save islanders in the city. And then lead us to this section of Oahu for the gospel's sake. I mean, we could take church planting classes and map out the island and look at the grid, but in reality, this is an area that doesn't have any church, and the only way in is through the family. And we're just praying that God would do that He would align our steps like He has already in this opportunity of coaching to be able to influence. Now, I just want to say this lady that approached me, she's the head of this club, and she's affiliated with USA Volleyball in the Valley. First of all, she's a lesbian. I mean, she actually goes to a church in town, a really broad church. But I was able to just share with her, let me just share with you what God's doing. This is why we're here. Man, she looked at me, she goes, you know what? We need that. I want you to coach here. I have no problem with you using volleyball as a tool to impact the kids' lives for the Lord. I'm sitting there going, whoa. That was not the conversation I thought that was going to go. I thought she was going to be like against it. But no, she was, and so even with that, I'm like, God could save her. I mean, she's quoting all the right phrases, but she needs to be changed from the inside out. And she's actually part of the city. Now, just in closing, in the city itself, in Salt Lake City itself, in the city, it's less than half LDS. It's a normal city. I mean, you got the temple and all the legalistic things about LDS, and then it's just the world. I mean, it's just straight up world. It's just two extremes. And so that's why our friends went and started a church right in the middle of the city. And it's a different context than Riverton, Utah, where we're going to be at. And so that's normal in the city, in that area, in even the homosexual lifestyle. Fact is, they'll have a big 5K, and they intentionally will run right past the temple. I mean, it's just like in your face, right? You got moral living with LDS, and then you got worldly living, and they just go at it. And they're both wrong, and they both need Jesus. And so that church in the city is reaching many people. It's in its 5th year, and they have about 300 people attending the church, and God is doing some great things. And so they're ready to be a part of sending some folks down to Riverton with us as lay people to really just help in this revitalization and church planning effort. And so Pastor wanted me to share a little bit about me. Hopefully that helps you to know who I am and not just go, how do you say his name? But I'm thankful, first of all, just as a closing thought, I'm just thankful for the sovereignty of God in taking a little girl from Nitro, West Virginia, and bringing her to Hawaii, and how God used even a church planter to save my dad. And here we are, and we just want to serve the Lord. Let's pray. Father, thank you for just this time, just to be acquainted and sharing the burden that you've placed on our hearts, the need for the gospel in this valley. Lord, I even thank you for the faithful men and women that many of us have encountered over the years, that have labored faithfully and shared the word of God to us. And I think of those in the valley that have labored for decades. And it's easy to get discouraged because you don't see the fruit, but yet the seeds are being planted. And now there's a need for laborers to come and to water and to harvest. And we just want to partner together with the gospel. There's only one kingdom, and it's your kingdom. We're not living on this earth to just make our own kingdom and to do it well. It's actually, we're living for your kingdom. And so the gospel is what drives us. It's what fuels us when it's difficult and it's hard. And we just pray that you would have your will and your way in the valley and then in Hawaii. And Lord, I pray that this week would be just an encouraging and a challenging time for all of us. I know it's been already for me. And I praise you for allowing me to be here to meet these folks at Faith Baptist Church. And we ask that you bless your day today. In Jesus' name, amen.